Good afternoon. Sexual and gender-based violence terrorizes women and girls around the world, affecting as many as 1 in 3 women, according to the UN's report in January 2020. A problem which is considered to be a global pandemic. What role does media play in fighting this pandemic? How essential are reporters in bringing these cases to light so that authorities can take action? How has the progress of media reporting been? Where are we now from gender-based violence, and what do we still lack today? I'm Jour, an activist, advocate for freedom of speech and human rights, the founder of Human Dignity Union, a newly established NGO in Lebanon, and a Lebanese TV host who has held a significant number of shows dealing with gender-based violence and human rights and equality. I will be moderating this session with exceptional reporters and independent journalists who have had years of experience in this field, particularly advocating to end gender-based violence. I'd like to welcome Dalal Mouawad, Sobhiya Najjar, and Sewell to this session. Dalal is a senior producer and correspondent at Associated Press and an award-winning journalist who has had an enriching career in journalism at the United Nations, Jazeera English, and LBCI. Sobhiya is an independent journalist and TV producer who worked with prominent media outlets like BBC, Al Jazeera, LBCI, and Future TV, implementing and supervising campaigns, news, film, and television production covering women's rights, political, social, and humanitarian topics. And Abby is an American journalist based in Lebanon. She has received the Times Pulitzer Prize for Public Service in 2011 as part of the Los Angeles Times team. Since 2016, she has been based in Beirut, now as a journalist with L'Orient Le Jour, and as a freelancer with articles appearing in publications including US News and World Report, Public Radio International Foreign Policy, Wired, National Geographic Travel, Refugees Deeply, Middle East Eye, and The New Humanitarian. Thank you, Dalal, Sobhiya, and Abby for being with us. I'm going to start.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
I'm going to start with Dalal. How do you define gender-based violence?
To put it simply, gender-based violence is violence targeting an individual for her or his gender. Or it can be violence affecting a person belonging to a gender group disproportionately. Of course, gender-based violence is a crime. It's a human right violation. The main victims here are women and girls. It could also be men in a household. And what's important to know is that although the women and girls are the main victims, gender-based violence also affects the family, the community at large, and society. It's a social problem. And unfortunately, in the media, it's not always depicted as such. We look at it from a standalone. We look at it, from the point of view of individual cases, although it's a wider social problem.
Yeah. Sobhiya.
Yes, I totally agree with Dalal. So it also, I want to add, it includes any act of threat by man or male-dominated institution that inflict physical, sexual, physiological, and I want to add what Dalal said about it starts with the family to grow up in the small community, then to the media outlet, and then in the state. So we don't have any law to protect these people, especially girls and women.
Yeah. Abby, what do you think are the causes of unequal power between genders, which in turn lead to gender-based violence?
Well, I think you have different issues. You have the issue of laws and you have the issue of culture. And when I say culture, I'm not picking on Lebanon or the MENA region, because in the US, where I'm from, we have stronger laws, perhaps when it comes to domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment. But we still have a culture that promotes the violence against women, and it's still extremely widespread. So I think laws can be a starting point, but first of all, you need to enforce them. And second, you need to eventually have a change in the mentality in society so that people, and especially men, understand that other people's wants and needs are just as important as theirs. And the fact that you're stronger than someone or you have a higher social position doesn't give you the right to force anything on someone.
Dalal, what is the role of the media in addressing gender-based violence? I mean, what do we still lack today in the media in terms of adopted mechanisms, the methods to serve its role, or the way it should be? What is still missing? We always feel that there's something missing.
Yeah. I'll answer the first part, but I think the second part is more important.
Yeah.
Of course, the most obvious role is raising awareness, whether it's in countries where there are laws and protection mechanisms, or countries like ours where we lack the institutional and legal framework. So raising awareness about this type of violence, individual cases, or the bigger social problem. I also think the media can play directly or indirectly a role in enacting laws, in creating protection mechanisms. And we've seen in Lebanon that the increased attention that the media has paid to cases of domestic violence did play a role in passing the law on domestic violence a few years ago. Although this law was not perfect, it was not complete, but it was acknowledged by the organizations and the people who worked on the ground that the media was a partner really in this domestic violence law. Now, what is missing?
But why did it fade? I mean, a couple of years ago, you told me that the media was stressing on these things.
Yeah.
Now it's not a priority.
This is what's missing is that, again, we don't look at this as a social problem. We don't really follow up on the story on the long run. It's really, we have to wait for incidents, for individual domestic violent cases that make it to the media, that make it to the public, to shed light or to talk about this issue, or certain anniversaries like Women's Day, etc. And I don't think that the media's approach to this is really the right one. First of all, there's a lot of focus on the physical violence only. Although you know that gender-based violence is also emotional, psychological, economic. So that part is missed out from the narrative. There's a lot of focus on the victim narrative. So always depicting women with the tears, with the bruises. And I'm sorry, but on the long run, focusing only on a victim narrative will lead kind of to a normalization of that. So the more you see that, the more the audience or the viewers would really think, okay, this is becoming more normal. It's a very thin line, and it can be dangerous, and it can also create a fatigue among the viewers or the media that, it's always this victim narrative, etc. So I think what is really missing is an empowering narrative, really looking at this subject and this issue and at these stories from an empowering, a resilience narrative. And I've done a lot of stories, by the way, where I would find a character or a voice that's really maybe doing impactful, meaningful change in the community, and they could be survivors themselves of GBV violence. And I would tell the story of other victims and survivors, but it's kind of a positive story. And really, you would be surprised how much it resonates with people, and it can have an impact.
Her as a leader.
Now, the media is always focusing on the victim, and we're going to talk about the danger of that too, because here there's a big protection concern, of course. And I still think the media is stuck in the sensational framework. The stories are still very sensational, almost like in an entertainment way, and that's very sad because these are very, very serious, stories and issues. And unfortunately, and we'll talk about this, the media sometimes becomes part of the problem instead of offering solutions.
Yeah. Sobhiya, do you agree with Dalal that showing things from an angle of excitement or in terms of ratings, or only like shedding lights on women that are always crying while the real issue is from the inside, and sometimes we cannot see it?
Yes, I totally agree, but I want to add something that it depends on the reporters, it depends on the media outlet, because some media outlet in the Arab, also in the Arab world, or international media, they have a guideline of ethic of journalism. Yeah. And we have this course at university. In all majors, we have the ethics of human rights. If sometimes when you go and work with some, I'm talking about local media outlet or TV or newspaper, you follow the path, or you follow some journalists and the rating and the goals of some TV, and you forget about ethics. But I want to add that some international and Arab TVs like BBC, they have a very good, and also AP and other AFP and the other media outlets, they have these ethics, and they don't break these ethics internationally to just mention women as a victim and crying and etc.
Before moving to Abby, she was talking about the local channels or the media in Lebanon. We all know that sometimes the guidelines are not respected, but what should be done? I mean, we cannot only just sit and watch and say that the Lebanese outlets are not doing their job. We should do something.
I think it starts with the journalist himself or herself. Really abiding by what is ethical journalism. Not everything that can be published should be published, and it's really up to you to judge that. And we'll talk more about the protection of the subjects of these stories. So I think it starts with the journalist, and then, as Sobhiya was saying, the media outlets should have very strict guidelines, and it should. There should be consequences to not abiding to these guidelines, legal consequences, and it happens like at the AP, there's no way you are allowed to identify a gender-based violence survivor, no matter what, even if she accepts, even if she consents, you don't identify them. That's like a general rule. So there should be very strict rules, and I think there should be laws at the national level also when it comes, to...
Strict laws.
Strict laws, of course, because the way I approach gender-based violence is the well-being and the protection of the survivor is more important than the story or the scoop. But that's not the case for a lot of media outlets locally, unfortunately, and we're still looking after the views and the clicks and, very sensational.
And the ratings.
And the ratings,
Abby, how difficult is it for you and challenging to deliver a story or to tell a story in writing? I mean, Sobhiya and Dalal, we have the picture, we have the voice, we have the sound, we have the story, but you are telling the story in writing. How challenging is this?
That's true. It is a lot more challenging sometimes to convey, especially a very emotional story in writing. And sometimes you have to ask more detailed questions when you're writing because you don't have the visuals that video journalists have. So you have to really be able to describe and really put people in the situation so they can themselves as being there.
Dalal, do you see lacking in media programs, especially in social affairs, in awareness when it comes to gender-based violence? I mean, I think today it's only reported on the news mainly. Not a lot of social TV shows. It's fading. Yeah,
you're right. It's, as I mentioned, it's very occasional in general, even for news. So it's not a continuous story, although this is a social phenomena that we're living with every single day. I think that, there's more or less more news reports than talk shows but the problem is that the talk shows that we have also are not necessarily playing the good cop here. They are often part of the problem. They host gender-based violence survivors without any protection concerns. It's a drama show. So it really depends on how you're going to even approach this. It has to be very educational, again, raising awareness, taking all the necessary measures to protect these people who either decide to speak on camera or in a text story. And to add on what Abby is saying, I think it's very challenging to write a text story, but very often with gender-based violence, it might be a way out for protection concerns. So I've had many instances where I wanted to film someone, but I ended up only writing a story about them because of these protection concerns. So sometimes print media can help us, tell the story without jeopardizing or risking the lives.
But the reach is still different. That's why we need the TV stations.
It's much more limited.
Because the TV stations should be, or the media should be partners in what we're doing. But you were saying that the TV host or the producer should know how to tackle these issues. How could he isolate himself, or how can she isolate herself from, I don't know, the channel, the management, the rating thing, and the problems that we're facing every day? I mean, this is our main issue and our main problem. And whether we like it or not, we need the media. If the media doesn't stress on these things, I mean, we'll not have the reach that we need.
You can't, even if you're trained and you're an ethical journalist, if you are working in a specific outlet and they have an agenda, or they look at this differently, it will be difficult. I mean, to be honest, I've been lucky more or less, and now I work for an international media outlet that is super objective and unbiased and really respects the ethics of this profession. But it's a challenge, and I think all of us have been in situations where it wasn't, the most comfortable situations.
Sobhiya, do you think that the independent digital media, based on what Dalal was talking about, is going to be enough one day to stress and tackle these problems, gender-based violence and these issues?
First of all, if we have internet for all these women in the North Lebanon, East, West, in Bekaa and South Lebanon, of course, it's gonna tackle everyone. It's gonna be a great platform for women. But till now, unfortunately, the TV station, they're still playing a big role regarding these causes. That's why we have to push them to do more reports, to do more educational programs about women. And I want to mention regarding the journalists, yes, they can make a change. Okay, it's difficult. It's a long path with the local media outlet, but they can make a change if they trust the journalists. At least a little change. I think Dalal and we did a lot of change at LBCI, not directly with the upper management, but at least with our colleagues, with the crew we were working with the camera person, because we're not all coming from the same school, we're not coming from the same culture, even if we are Lebanese and we live in the same country.
Exactly. Dalal, your short movie won the Samir Asir Prize this year. We're going to watch 1 minute, and then I'll ask about it.
كنت دايما احس حالي انه انا موجوده بالجسم الغلب. دايما احس حالي انه الشيء اللي او الشخص اللي عم شوفه قدامي بالمرايه هو مش انا. بس كان دايما الموضوع اكبر مني، وكان دايما انه ماني قدرانه انه سيطر عليه. تخيلي انت تحسي حالك كل عمرك محبوسه جوات جسمك، محبوسه بقلب القوقعه اللي انت قاعده فيها ومنك قدرانه تطلعي.
Some survivors hope their stories would bring justice, and others they feel like it would do them harm. How do you evaluate the risk as a reporter when publishing such sensitive stories?
I think when you're first identifying the subject of your story, that's where your homework starts. And it's really important to make sure that whoever's story you're telling, you're not really exposing them and putting them, at risk. For example, the story that we just watched, the one that won, it's about a transgender woman that I met, and I told her her story. She was very open about being on camera, and she was really informed about the exposure she was getting. So it's very important to explain to the person what kind of exposure they are getting. You build trust, but you explain to them that they're going to be exposed, there might be repercussions, they have to understand what it means to go on camera. Once you know that they have, they're informed and they sign a consent form, you've kind of protected yourself. But then you still have to consider, yes, if you have to, hide their identity or not. For example, in the case of Leah, the transgender woman, her only worry was that her family would be able to identify where she lives. She didn't have a problem with her face or her name because she had transitioned into a woman and she changed her. So we made sure that we never mentioned the location, the way we filmed this. You couldn't easily identify where she was living. In many cases, you have to hide the identity. This is a discussion that you have with the survivor, with the person whose story you are telling. Really making sure that, again, what I mentioned, sometimes it's better not to film at all. There's a Yazidi minor that I really filmed a while ago, and she had just escaped from ISIS captivity. And although the people who were taking care of her, a UN organization, were okay with us filming her, and she was more or less okay, then I found out that actually her sister and her mom were still in captivity. Oh. And we were really worried that if in any way she was identifiable, they would be in danger. So we decided not to film at all, not even hide her.
So it's up to you as a reporter
to identify. It's up to you as a reporter, but you also have to talk to your editor, to the media outlet. It's a discussion, and you have that discussion with the subject of your story, the survivor. I mean, it depends if she's a minor or an adult. But yeah, you have to take the maximum. And again, sometimes it's better not to do video. Sometimes it's better not to identify. And then the interview technique itself, you really have to prepare yourself. These are people who've been through trauma.
Exactly.
They are very fragile, very vulnerable. So you can't interview them.
Any small thing can affect them.
Yeah, you can't interview them the way you interview, any other guest or person. Yeah.
But what I meant also, even if you have the consent and even if the victim signed a letter, it's up to you to identify what is dangerous to show and what is not dangerous based on each and every story.
Yes, it's really.
It doesn't work the same way with everyone.
No, I think it's really a case by case. It depends on the story, the context, the information that you were able to gather about that person.
Yeah. Abby, when reporting from vulnerable and marginalized area, you've worked with refugee camps. What are some of the stories and experiences of women that you can share with us?
One issue that I've reported on, particularly in the refugee camps, is the issue of child marriage, which is an increasing problem, especially as the economic situation becomes worse and people are more desperate circumstances.
Yeah.
So this is a case where I completely agree with what the other ladies were saying. You have to approach people in a very sensitive way. I mean, you have to realize that this is a taboo subject in their community if they're talking about, especially if they've experienced abuse in the marriage. So you have to make sure that they really understand what they're going into and that they want to speak about it, and also that they'll be protected. But the women that I've spoken to, or the girls that went through this, in most cases, they've left the marriage now, so they're in a situation where they're safe and they want to speak out about this to try to prevent others from having the same situation.
Yeah. Sobhiya, what happens when journalists, they tell stories of survivors carelessly or without proper training? How important is it to talk to professionals, to experts, to know how to report these stories?
They might, of course, first of all, we cannot do any report. If we are in a very good media outlet or any professional TV, you cannot deliver a story for violence, women violence, or LGBT, or etc. for this kind of people, for unprofessional or untrained person. And if we really do, so we can have psychological abuse, physical abuse for these people. We can, because we are also scared of resources. We don't have these resources as a journalist, so we don't know how to deal with these people. So first of all, we have to talk to, for example, if we are dealing with her directly, we have to talk to a psychologist. We have to talk to an NGO who are specialized in these cases. We have to talk to a humanitarian lawyers, like we have a lot now in Lebanon. Without all these components, we cannot really do it alone. Of course, we have to talk to our editor and to our team to discuss this story, because it can make a lot of sexual abuse also for this woman, maybe violence abuse for this woman out of without knowing.
Tell me about your team. Tell me about the experience with your team. You were saying before that each and every one of us comes from.
It depends.
We're from the same country, but from different cultures, and we think differently. Tell me about some incidents with your team when you were shooting or reporting on gender-based violence, or with transsexuals or transgender.
Yes, it was a story. Like 4 years ago, I was filming with a camera person. He's a very nice camera person, and he's a workaholic. He loves his work. So usually I I do like a brief for the team. So
Yeah.
I told them at the same day, because I'm working as a news reporter, so we don't have time like other reporters or other TV programs to introduce our topics ahead of time. So I told them we are going now to film a transgender person. So please, you have to be careful. You should talk to her as her. So they told me we're not going. So we were on halfway, يعني. So
You were on the road going to film.
Yeah, we still have like half an hour too. So, and you know the traffic in Lebanon, and this is a very special case, and it took me like 2 months to get this approval from this lady, from her psychologist,
and how did you manage?
From the social worker. I couldn't manage, so I called the upper management to tell him. Sorry, we forced him to come with me because we cannot also to have another cameraman because we have lack of staff. So he went with me. He didn't accept to call her as a woman. Yes, he was telling her all the time, "You are a man. You are a man." So,
let me ask Dalal, because she wants to give an opinion on this. How destructive is it to address, as in, like, refuse to address her as a woman?
Just to follow up how important the team is, when I did, so the film that I did that won the Samir Asir, it's a short film, so we filmed it over a few days. I made sure that every single person on the team is someone that I trust, that I know will approach, the transgender person the right way with the right terminologies. We even had a briefing before, etc. It can be very detrimental because even if that camera person had arrived with Sobhiya on the filming set, it would have really upset the person who was being interviewed.
Might have ruined the whole thing.
Yes, exactly. And it can have a psychological impact.
Of course,
and this is something that we really have to focus on. It's not just you put that person in danger sometimes when you're exposing them, is that the type of questions you ask might lead to a relapse. For example, I worked a lot with Yazidi women because, they're survivors of trauma. You can trigger trauma again. You can send them back to hell because of the interview that you do or the questions that you ask. So you have to be very careful with the questions, the terminologies that you
Shouldn't there be a certain code of conduct for everyone to sign? I mean, if we're tackling these...
As Sobhiya said, some media outlets have them. Yeah, there should be.
In Lebanon.
But unfortunately, Joe, and what Abby was saying earlier, the culture is a problem, is that these are beliefs that we hold and that we live by. And this is where the media is also not playing a role when it comes to gender-based violence, is that the way the media is depicting the women, we're still not focusing on gender parity, that men and women are equal. We're still not working on stories that change the perceptions that we have about women or LGBTIQ individuals. So there's a wider problem that's at stake, and it's the culture and the beliefs and the way we are behaving.
So it's how to educate the whole society and spread awareness.
Yes, of course.
Joe, I just want to add something. I worked also with another media outlet, international media outlet in Lebanon, but the camera person, they were trained enough to go and to film these people. So it's not only about the culture, it's only about the media training. It's very important to know how to address the message for the staff. So it's very important.
Yeah. Abby, based on your previous work about refugees, what external factors could hinder reporting on gender-based violence in refugees communities?
Well, as you probably know, refugees in Lebanon are always afraid of getting any attention from the authorities, whether it's the Lebanese authorities or Syrian authorities in some cases.
Yeah.
So already they're generally afraid to speak to journalists. Sometimes I find that they feel less threatened by speaking to an English language outlet because they think that no one's going to read it from Lebanon or Syria, so they feel more comfortable about that.
Yeah.
But you'll have to keep it in mind and make sure that you're not putting anybody in a dangerous situation. Then there's the internal factors that in their community, this might be a very taboo subject to talk about. So, for instance, if you want to interview women, you want to make sure that the husband is not there, or the shawish, the leader of the camp, is not there. There's not a man that's in the room when you're speaking with her, because she won't feel free to speak freely if there's a man that's there watching.
Of course. Dalal, I mean, we've all worked on such cases, whether it's you or Sobhiya or myself, and we should always follow up. The victims have our numbers, and you build a certain connection with them. How exhausting is it to follow up these vulnerable, weak people? I mean, it's not only the report. We are human beings at the end of the day, and we build a certain connection with them.
It takes a toll on you. I've also reported on refugees for 4 years and gender-based violence survivors, and I've kept a personal connection with many of them, but I've realized that with time, following up nonstop and talking to them nonstop was really taking a psychological toll on me as well. So there's, at some point you have to draw the line. And if your media outlet is not really keen on following up or doing following up stories, sometimes the personal connection is good, but then you have to be clear that this is how much you can do. You shouldn't raise people's expectations, because
promise.
Sometimes they feel like your story or your report is gonna make a change. So you are very clear about that. But yeah, it takes a very heavy toll on all of us, and these are stories that sit with you forever. There are refugee stories that I will never forget. There are, Yazidi women stories that I will never forget. But as a journalist and as an individual, with time, I learned how to cope. So I have a coping mechanism.
And maybe you look at the big picture, like using the story to create real change in the whole society.
I think giving a voice is a starting point. So we are giving them a voice. This is great. But I taught myself that, I can't change everything. And, as a journalist, there's a limit to what I can and cannot do. So I live with that, but it's not easy.
Yeah. Sobhiya, how was it like you as a reporter to tackle such cases within your work communities? I mean, I don't know, within your family, the surrounding?
It depends on the family and also on the surrounding, but I'm lucky enough to have supporters. But sometimes in your community, we're not heroes. So we live in this community. We know how they think. We know the culture enough. How they look at you. So sometimes they call me the LGBT person. So you always talk about LGBT. What do you want from the LGBT? These people, they should be, sometimes they told me they should be killed. And recently I was filming a program in the Arab world. So they told me, you the reporter of LGBT, you the reporter of women. So I'm so proud to talk about it and to give them this voice. But till now, we are missing a lot of awareness in the media. We are missing a lot of awareness in our communities, not only in Lebanon, also in the Arab world, and especially because some media outlets, they have not religious but political religious agenda. They even not only in Lebanon, also in the Arab world, with a very good media outlet and very professional media outlet, but they don't want to face any problem with the religious political parties.
Dalal, now what she was saying is really important. She was talking about religion, she was talking about the society, she was talking about part of the society that were telling her, you are the reporter of LGBT or gender-based violence. Did this change with time? I mean, the people, are they more progressive now? Are they accepting this more? Or you think we're still, I don't know, going backwards and we're not moving forward?
It would be unfair to say nothing has changed. I think there's very slow change, and the media has somehow played a role breaking the taboos, talking more about domestic violence, about gender-based violence, the LGBTI community in Lebanon. I think the approach is what is still very much wrong. But unfortunately, we're not there yet. It's a long way to go, and as we said, it's really
Are we that far from changing the perception?
I don't think we're even halfway. I mean, based on what I've seen on the ground,
What are the
unfortunately.
obstacles? What's the main problem?
I think the obstacles are, you know, the way we are living, the way, the influence that religious institutions have over people and the education they get from these places, how, you know, people are brainwashed. I think the schools are not playing the role really in their curriculums. The media is also really missing some of the narrative. The legal and institutional framework is not there. There are no incentives because there's basically no accountability if you do something wrong. And you know, and you've covered cases of women who've been beaten and killed by their husbands and their spouses, and the perpetrators are still free, or there's a politician who gets them out of jail.
They even blame the victim.
Yeah. And this is something, by the way, that I wanted to talk about, and this is very dangerous, is that in the media narrative, and not just Lebanon and the Arab world, there's directly or indirectly a victim blaming narrative, and that's very, very dangerous. Insinuating that the survivor has had anything to do with what happened to them is really not acceptable.
Abi, I need your opinion on this. I mean, the mixture of religion with politics, especially while talking about gender-based violence in the media.
You mean in the media in Lebanon or in general?
Yeah. In Lebanon or some countries in the Middle East, what Sobhiya was talking about and what Dalal was talking about. How dangerous it is for religion and politics to interfere with the media, and especially when we're talking about these cases, human rights cases.
Yeah. I mean, I think whether it's religious authorities or political authorities, it's always a problem if you have people in power who are trying to keep people quiet or say you can't talk about this topic, or that someone who was abused, it was her fault. But I mean, it's clear, I'm not saying that the religious authorities are bad or that the religion is bad, but it's clear that in some cases, legal protections are not being taken because religious authorities feel this would take away from their power. So that's what I've observed.
Dalal, since we're talking about the religious figures or religious power, I want to go back to the Monsoor Labaki case, this famous case that you reported, and everyone followed this case. How difficult was it for you to keep reporting and stressing on such a case, especially that the person accused is an idol, or I don't know how to put it. He is someone that is nearly worshipped by a lot of Christians.
So for those who don't know, this was a case that made it to the Vatican about, you know, a priest who was abusing and molesting
it started in France,
girls.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, there were cases in France and Lebanon, and the first report I did was just releasing the court decision that actually appeared in a Catholic publication in France. So that was the first thing I did. I found also some documents that I published, and just from that basic report, people went crazy. How dare you? How dare you talk about this man? This man is a saint. He's done nothing. And there was also a campaign against the media outlet LBCI, who had published this report. But I did not want to stop there, and I wanted to follow up on the story. That was my job as a journalist. And I did an investigative work, and I got to the niece of Monsoor Labaki, who was one of the main victims. And I traveled to where she lived, and I filmed her, and I came back with a great interview. It was the first time that she spoke to a journalist in decades. And it took me ages to build trust with her, and that's taken a toll on me. And then I come back, and they don't publish my work. They find many excuses to keep postponing the publication.
Why weren't they published?
They never gave. So one of the reasons was there was this campaign from the Maronite Church on LBC. And then they were
like. But who decided not to publish?
The top. The senior level, of course.
Where, in the channel?
Yes, in the channel.
But it was published then, and it was published again.
Eventually, yeah.
I hosted the lawyer, and I had the whole file.
So what happened is that the story sat in the archives for about 2 years, and I was always given reasons to postpone the publication. And then the survivor herself changed her mind at some point. And then a year after I left, you published part of that interview
And
that
everybody
I
started
did.
talking.
And everybody, and I'm very grateful, by the way, that you did, because it took a toll on me, not to be able to give a voice
They need closure.
to that survivor.
All the victims.
Yes, especially that legally here they're not. I mean, they're lucky to have
They're
French
not getting it. They're saying that
survivors.
he's not guilty. He's innocent.
Yes, and
up until now.
Yes, and the church here was protecting him, but it took on a personal toll on me. I was threatened. I got like death messages on Facebook. I was called a Zionist Jew in a press conference, and he himself called me. By the way,
he called you on the phone.
He called me on the phone, and he used some of my family members who were donors of the Maronite Church to threaten me indirectly. Anyway, and that really pushed me to go ahead and follow up with the story. But again, it doesn't come to the journalist at the end of the day. If a media outlet doesn't want to go ahead.
And go ahead.
Yes, so...
This is mainly, we face this a lot, to be honest.
Yeah,
in most of the cases. I mean, I talked about the case, the Mission de Vie case, and it's a very famous case, and I sat with all the victims, and I had all the facts, and yet I faced a lot.
And they take you to court, and it's
of course,
like,
all the time. Sobhiya, the Monsoor Labaki case or any similar case, I need your opinion on this, because I think you lived this, you faced this in several cases, whether by the channel or by religious figures or from within sometimes the family or the community or the area you lived in.
Yes, so that's why I was talking about the religious, they are affecting us indirectly. In our reports or in life or our daily behaviors. So this is what happened now with Dalal and with other reporters, not only on LGBT or gender-based violence, in different cases while reporting against the church, against any religious outlet or any religious party. So you are affected directly, and we have seen this recently before before the revolution, and then after the revolution, not only with the religious person, or also with our politicians. So we are not allowed. We don't have this freedom. Let's be honest. We don't have this freedom in Lebanon. We don't have the freedom of press as we really wanted.
Is it why you left? Is this why one of the reasons that made you work for international platforms or?
No, not at all. So I want to tell, I was working, very well, Joe. So I was pushing all the seniors to do my report as I want. But sometimes you need to work on an international level to know how they work. There is a big difference between the local and first because of the capacity, because of the money, because the TVs, they need money, because of the political and religious agenda that we have in Lebanon and in the Arab world. So that's why when you work with international organizations or international media outlets, you have an open-minded, you have more chances,
more respect to human rights,
more ethics to human rights, of course. You will be more trained, even if you have 15 years experience, but you have to be trained for the guideline of this or other media outlets.
Abi, how important is it for each and every one of you to, I don't know if I'm choosing the right word, is to be stubborn while working on these cases? I mean, even if you face challenges, or even if someone tries not to publish your story or to hide it, how important is to stay stubborn and to keep reporting?
Yeah, I think once the survivor has decided that she wants to tell her story and she's willing to trust you with her story, then you have an obligation to do the rest of it. So if someone is brave enough to come out and say that this happened to me and perhaps face danger or consequences to themselves, even though obviously we're going to try to protect them, but if they're brave enough to do that, then we should be brave enough also to pursue the story to the end.
Of course.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Dalal, the title of this discussion is The Role of the Media in Fighting Gender-Based Violence. After all what you talked about, what is the role needed today more than ever that the media should play in fighting gender-based violence? Is it playing its role?
I would say it's an incomplete role. I think really not looking at this as an occasional story. This is something that we're living with every day and should be part of continuous coverage.
Yeah.
And I think we should really do it in an ethical way in order not to become part of the problem. The media should not become part of the problem, but should be looked at as part of the solution, as a partner to protection, etc. And I also think the media needs to start changing its narrative when it comes to gender-based violence. It would help tremendously when it does that, and that would include, the approach, the interview, etc.
But how would this happen? I mean,
really
the people running the media should change how they see
I think
things.
we need training. We need trainings. I was giving a training this weekend with the Maishadiya Foundation to young journalism students about interviewing techniques for gender-based violence. I think these trainings should go in all the media outlets. They should be made available one way or another free, because media outlets today are facing financial issues and they don't have the means to train. But foreign journalists, they get these trainings, or I went to a journalism school where it was mandatory for me
and
to
we
take
go to
a class.
Conferences and we learn
we need
more.
training, and I'm not talking about training only for journalists and reporters, for producers, for editors, at the senior level, everyone, because it's a teamwork and the decision gets made, at the top level.
Even the owners, maybe.
Yeah,
the upper management,
senior level,
the
senior level.
Yeah. Sobhiya, a message to all vulnerable, weak women that are suffering from gender-based violence, domestic violence, violation of their human rights and dignity.
Wow, this is very difficult. Don't mask or deny your vulnerability. It's your greatest asset. So,
Dalal.
Don't stay.
A message to each and every woman, vulnerable, weak.
Don't stay silent.
Yeah, exactly.
Silence is not going to help. It's not going to protect your children. It's going to put them at risk. It's not going to protect you. And we know how many women in Lebanon died trying to protect their families, thinking this was the right way. They paid the price with their own lives. Speak out and fight for your own rights. You deserve to live, and to live with full rights and to be protected from violence.
How can we ensure that they're going to be protected if they speak out?
It's the legal framework. We need laws, and even in Lebanon, you might have laws, and some of our laws are great, but they're not being implemented. We need an accountability mechanism. This is a big problem, and not just with gender-based crimes, but in general, criminality is not held accountable, in general. Laws for sure, and the organizations can do the work, the non-governmental organizations, without the legal framework.
Exactly, because they complete each other.
Yeah.
Abby, your message to each and every vulnerable, weak woman out there.
Well, first of all, no matter what happened to you, they can't take away your dignity and your basic worth as a human being. And secondly, just because you violated your rights, it doesn't mean you're weak. You, as a survivor, you're someone very strong. And for those of the women that are speaking out about their experiences, I have the greatest respect for you.
Thank you, Dalal. Thank you, Sobhiya,
you,
and thank you, Abby, for a fruitful session in which we gained a much-needed scope on the importance of the media and press in ending gender-based violence. For most of recorded history, gender-based violence has been condoned, but those who had the power to prevent or punish this violence through religion, law, or custom have openly approved it and are still approving it until today. The reason gender-based violence is finally out in the open is that activists have brought it to global attention with the help of the media or social media or digital media. However, we have yet long ways to go, for as the whole world is facing the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic, gender-based violence has been drastically increasing within households and communities as stress, loss of income, and isolation are taking over people's lives. More cases of rape and murder are being recorded every day, more victims are abused, and more women are being silenced. This is why today is not the day when we still discuss what gender-based violence is, neither the day where we explain what forms it takes, today is the day where we say what systems or what mechanisms are in place in helping victims of gender-based violence. This day is the day where we should be launching new projects and enforcing laws to help victims. This day is the day where we should review what we did from this day last year until now. How many victims have been helped and protected? How many victims have been empowered? Where are we from punishable laws, regulations, and healthy environments? And what do we still have to do to ensure that our women are always empowered and our children are well informed and educated on the matter? Thank you.